Hi, welcome. This is the CaddyInfo Cadillac Conversations. We do these on Thursday nights with members of the forum, and we are live. If you ever want to be live with us, then contact me on Google Plus or Cadillac Jim on Google Plus, since he hosts sometimes, as he did last week when I was on a plane. Welcome, Jim.
Good evening.
Excellent. We may have others join us as we go. I haven't heard from Texas Jim to see what he's doing. We're missing our friend Vinny, so shout out there, Vinny. MJ joined last week when I was not here, so good for him, and we'd love to have you back. Kevin, of course, if you're out there and you can't find the invite, then signal me or tug your left ear and let me know that I need to invite you again, and I will do so. Sometimes the invites are confusing to people. They can't find them for whatever reason, and so if you're ever in that predicament, try and get my attention somehow. I do try and run the Q&A on the screen while we're on, and I try and monitor everything I can in order to keep up.
I did see one positive note in the news late today. Google is not actively bidding DoD weapons programs.
Oh, good. What should they? How did that even come up?
The unreliability of their software.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they're not going to run the space program next. So.
No.
Well, what do you want for nothing? The fact that it works at all is amazing. Now, Cadillac did feature on their websites that sales in China for Cadillac were up 36% year over year in February versus February of last year. Last year they sold 4,400 Cadillacs in China, and this year they sold almost 6,000 Cadillacs in China. And so, is that where you would expect them to be?
I don't really have an idea what the market shares and total volume is in China. That sounds like a commercial success, and short of making comparisons and gaming market shares and looking elsewhere than one's navel, then I'd say it sounds good. This 50% increase is just magnificent, whatever the relative positions in market share are. So yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, Buick is a big star in China.
Yeah.
Enough, for whatever reason, Buick's a fine car, so I'm not taking anything away from Buick, but they have been very popular in China, and so I was trying to flip really quickly, although it's not working. I was trying to flip really quickly to see how many cars constitutes a lot for Buick. So GM and their joint venture in China sold a total of 340,000 cars in January, which is down a couple of points from last year. And this is January, not February, but in January. So their total, 340,000 in total in January, 340,000. And in January, Cadillac sold about 5,000. In February, we said that Cadillac sold right at 6,000. So they were up a little bit that way. Best-selling model in China in January was the SRX with the ATS right behind it. Now, Buick sales, I was trying to see how many, our question was still how many Buicks sold in China. They're repeating to me the... Oh, here it is. Buick sales in the domestic market in January were 90,000. It was followed the sales of the... Still not telling me the Buick Chinese sales, unless they mean the domestic Chinese market.
I don't know. Is it in Chinese?
No, the announcement was from Shanghai.
Then it probably is.
Buick sales in the domestic market decreased 10% in January on an annual basis to 90,000 units. So Buick sells about 90,000 units a month versus Cadillac's just pushing 6,000. Most of them, they're XL unit, XL, XT, and GT, and then their SUVs are doing well. So good for Buick, but yeah, they're selling 15 times more Buicks than Cadillacs in China.
Hmm.
Now, so if Buick's really doing well, would you be pushing Cadillac as well?
Yeah, yeah, because you never know when the market's going to turn over some disruptive change, and when you have a disruptive change, usually the little guys come out of the woodwork and dominate.
Yeah, I think I agree that the strength that GM has is to bring a number of different models to the same market, right?
Yeah,
And
Buick
so,
represents some, good innovation, but solid, dependable quality in a luxury brand, whereas Cadillac is cutting edge innovation and all of the above at a higher price.
yeah, the classic was that Buick was kind of the doctor's car, right? Where you wanted a premium car, but you didn't want people to think that you thought that you were rich.
I suppose I hadn't thought of it that way.
That was the way it was always explained to me. Is a Buick was when you could afford a nicer car, but you didn't want to put on airs, so to speak,
Hmm.
and so you would get a Buick instead of a Cadillac. Uh, my parents always said, well, they got a Cadillac as soon as they could afford one. That was how they decided when to
Yeah.
get a Cadillac, was as soon as they could afford one.
Well, my feeling is that a rich man is somebody who rides in the back seat, and if you
Yeah,
drive the car, it's your car.
by that definition, though, yeah. Do you want to be rich?
uh, no, I want to be. I want to have fun.
Yeah, I want to drive the car, so I think that may limit my success, though, because I don't want to be driven. Now, if I had to be driven, I do want. There's a feature that they've talked about in future Cadillacs, and that you'll find in some other models, where the rear outboard seats will recline. And if I were going to be driven, first of all, my legs are too long to enjoy most cars if I were going to be driven. But if I were going to be driven, I would want. Sorry, I opened a window that opened a video in the background. If I were going to be driven, I would want at least a reclining seat.
Well, if I was driven and this didn't have enough footroom, I'd just turn sideways. Maybe even lay down on the seat. But then again, I'm a
Well,
redneck.
and that's what my son does, right? Is
Yeah,
he takes up the entire back seat if we're traveling,
yeah.
and has his computer over here and his feet over there, and uh, I never know if he's asleep or computering or what. Now he would be a prime one for the new Wi-Fi features that they're describing, where because if he had satellite connection and then a local Wi-Fi spot, he would be uh, happy. It wouldn't, we can go on a 26-hour drive as long as he can get the internet.
Well, what's the response time on World of Warfare?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't
Or
know if you would have enough bandwidth to play online games,
that's a
or
problem.
if you just be able to interface with your friends,
Yeah, big problem.
and if you think the OnStar used as a data line like that is going to have some sort of so many gigabytes per month?
Oh, I don't know. I doubt they'll have a data limit on it. I think it will be an asset. I was just joking. They really want you to be able to get your uh, email and other things on your cell phone. I think it's worthless to try to put something like that in a car because the technology rolls over faster than the cars, whereas Bluetooth is likely to be here for a few years.
Now, what do you think about the lane keeping? I was interested in, because one of the upcoming cars has this lane keeping technology, which is where the car, if you don't put on your blinker, the car will actually steer itself to stay in the current lane you're in. So if you took your
Oh,
hands off the wheel, the car continues to steer into the center of the lane you're in. And actually, if you try and change lanes but don't put your indicator on, the car, you can overcome it, but the car will fight against you. The car will try and steer you back into the lane.
I think that'll keep some people driving a lot longer than they would be ordinarily.
Is that a good thing as we have an aging population?
Well, the way it will keep them driving is it will not allow them to have a series of fender benders, which cost them their driver's license.
Right. Or
So
get their kids to take their keys away.
yeah, so when they can't find the car anymore, then that'll take them out of the traffic. But I think that from that sense, it'll make the streets a little safer. Yes.
Now, I tell you one thing I do want about autonomous cars, and all of this seems shaky to me, but the one thing I absolutely want is the Batman come pick me up feature, right? In other words, if I take my car to the dealer, or if I take my car to work and tell it, go over to Crest and get your oil changed and then meet me back here for lunch, and the car is able to go independently to the dealer, get maintenance done, and put itself back in my parking spot before I come out to get my lunch, that would be ideal, right?
Yes, but that kind of thing is going to affect the unemployment figures.
In a bad way?
Well, that's the kind of thing that you'd hire somebody to do, is run a damn errand for you. Yeah.
Oh, I say. Well, I'm not now. I'm not hiring somebody to run an errand for me now. I have to figure that out, right?
What I'd like to do is to
no one's getting out of.
I'd like to pull into a gas station, have it pop open the gas cap. Uh, the nozzle would rise like a cobra out of the pump. It would punch the 93 button, not the 97 or the 87, or God help us. And then it would and then it would rise magically and put itself back in the pump, and the receipt would drift in through the window, and you would go on your merry way.
Now, they are doing that with rechargeable cars, where they're talking about having smart snake-like cords which will plug the car in for recharging at night, so that you would pull into the garage and this cord would basically come out of the wall and attach itself, like an aircraft refueling boom to your electric car. The advantage is, if we were designing a cord to work with the new CT6 hybrid, you know exactly where the connection is and what type connection it is. Whereas if you were trying to design something to work on the gas pump, you have an interface problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
This car has a right side, right side, left side, where it's located, how the lid works, how to get the gas cap off, da-da-da.
Yeah.
So you have an interface problem. But if we said, if step one was every car has to have a standard gas cap, and that has a flow through that the machine could, one car did have that, where I think one of the Cadillacs I looked at had that, where it no longer had a gas cap. The gas cap literally, it had a self-sealing port instead of a cap, so that you could put the gas in without taking the cap off. Which I think is step one to what you're describing, because whatever the hose comes in, it needs to be able to attach itself without removing the cap.
Yeah, and the cap still has to hold pressure for your evap system. So, I hadn't heard of that at all. I like it though.
I don't remember which. I think it was the XTS Platinum when I tested it, that it didn't have a gas cap. It had some kind of port. It had a feature built into it. But yeah, I would welcome anything that helps with refueling. Refueling is a bang to me, because it takes time, and I endlessly wait until it's 25 degrees outside. I want a big timer. I want my car to remind me, if it's above 60 degrees, go fill me up with gas. Or any technology at all that would allow the car to refill itself with fuel while it was in the garage overnight, sign me up. Even if it meant a truck delivered gasoline to my house, 100 gallons of gasoline to my house every Saturday, and then we filled up the car in the garage, I'd be happy.
Well, when I was a kid, we had an external butane tank for our house heat and stoves, and that was the way it was delivered. The tank would drive up, and we woke up one morning and the house was cold, and we turned on the lights, and there was a knock at the door. It was a butane man. He had been sleeping in his truck waiting for us to wake up so he could put some. He knew the tank was empty, and he was there to fill our tank. Yeah, those were the days.
Good thing. The good thing he was there. That would have been a long, sad, cold day if he had gone on to the next house.
Well, I wasn't there really. I think this must have been before I was born. Or I was a little bitty baby.
A story from in the day.
No, I was born because they moved to that house right after I was born. I needed more room. I had my sister already, and then I was born. I had to have another bedroom.
Now, does it bother you if Cadillac begins to manufacture cars in China for the Chinese market?
Absolutely not.
I
No,
mean, do you worry that they'll slip some Chinese cars into the U.S. market?
I don't care if they do or not. I mean, what would we expect them to be? Inferior? I don't think so. I thought I don't think they would do that unless they thought the particular models they were importing were suitable for the purpose they were sold. I mean, might say this could happen in the world at large, but I can't see Cadillac doing that.
No, well, yeah, one Cadillac fan I was chatting with online was in Jordan, and that was very much his concern is if he were to buy an SRX, he wanted to make sure the SRX had come from the United States and not from China if
Well,
they begin to manufacture the SRX in China.
well, he has a legitimate concern. I can see that. So I guess what you're asking is what is that concern, and that is the new factory is unproven.
Yeah, and my argument was the Cadillac factories are actually done to a standard, and so in order for the Cadillacs to be manufactured to the current processes, the factory, by the nature of it, has to be built. Bless you, has to be built to a standard. Now the SRX in that sold in the United States comes from Mexico, so whether you buy a Mexican SRX or a Chinese SRX may all be very much the same, right?
Well, the Mexican factories have been validated. They've turned out to be good cars. All the Volkswagens been built since 1972, the Bugs, and all those things. A lot of the Golfs and so forth, and nobody, they're good cars. So I really don't have a problem with the Mexican factories. The automation is the same as you put it. The parts are the same. So I think that if the management is screened and the pre-production runs have the same standards, ring out standards, I don't see that there will be any difference between the cars. In point of fact, every model change, it's a new production line here. They have a new production line there. It's the same production line. I agree with the human uh, uh, nature thinking that, well, the factory has to be proved, and there is something to that. But it's I think 2 years is enough. Should be enough for most people. Once it's produced reliable cars for its first 2 years, well, then that should be enough. So, I personally don't see a problem at all.
Now, Cadillac sales were down slightly in a month that BMW in February, in a month that BMW and Mercedes both set new records for February sales.
Well,
So the market was there, the
mhm,
market was growing,
mhm.
and Cadillac continues to struggle.
Well, I would have to look into that and try to figure out what's going on in the minds of the buyers, or maybe there was a slightly different demographic, and one demographic was doing a little better than other that month. I don't know. It does sound like it's a matter of concern, but I don't know what to say about it. I will say that we've gotten away from something we emphasized quite a bit last year: is that every model that they release should be the best car they can build for that price. And I'm not, I haven't really analyzed. I'm not the Cadillac scholar that you are, so I don't really know if they've done that with all the ATS models.
Well, yeah, the ATS, of course, is a wonderful car, which
Yeah.
makes it confusing as to why its sales are not where they should be. Now, the good news story at Cadillac is the Escalade. The Escalade sales are up about 90%. The new model is doing very well. It has a very short availability. You know, the number of days of sales available in the dealer lots is very low, and Cadillac's average sale per car is up $9,000. So they have now just the mix of Escalades. The Escalade sells for $70 to $90,000. So just the mix of more Escalades versus ATSs is going to raise the average transaction price. Now, the other thing I wondered though is Cadillac, the last time they met with the dealers, they said they were not trying to decrease the number of dealers, but could Cadillac actually be whistling, what's the right word? Could Cadillac actually be allowing a pause in order to see if there's a little more survival of the fittest to be done among the Cadillac dealer network.
Well, I don't think that's a problem around here. The Cadillac dealers have about the right distribution. They're about 20 miles apart, and in a heavily settled area. So I think that's sort of optimal. Other regions, it might not be that way. I think you're more likely to see that in the lower price brands, and they close a lot of Chevrolet dealerships.
Yeah, Cadillac, though, has about 4 times more dealers than BMW or Mercedes, and they're selling 1/4 as many cars in the United States. And so their thinking is if you go to fewer dealers, each dealer will sell more cars and have a higher profit, therefore can lavish more money on customer service, and that's the avenue to high customer service.
Well, I will say that when I go to my dealer for service, and I've gone to 3 dealers for my car, well, since in the last 15 years since I've been in here, the East Coast, I get the undivided attention of whoever I'm talking to for as long as I need to talk to them. I can't say
Yes.
that in my days as a Chevrolet man that I ever saw that. And I will say that that a bad Cadillac dealer is hard to find, whereas a good Chevrolet dealer, back when I drove Chevrolets, was nearly impossible to find. I did find them, but they were gems among stones.
Oh, Texas Jim's off in the background somewhere. So Jim, I'm going to try and send you another invitation. Because the invitations decay or something if they don't hit right then. And I will send you a specific invitation also. So hopefully you'll be able to find your way in. Usually, if you don't see the invitation, he goes to the event page and it already has an invite on it. But maybe the invitations decay after a bit. Like if you don't respond within the first 15 minutes, then it goes on to...
Okay, on my page, I go to the Hangouts page, and under Home, on the right, they have a green window at the top that has this little cartoon person with the earphones on saying hi, somebody with a party hat on, a cat, and so forth. And it says in white, video hangouts. And underneath it either says, no one in your circles is having a video hangouts. Or, as it does now, it says, join a video hangout with Bruce Lunley. And a join button. And that was the first I saw, and that's the way I get in a lot. So,
yeah, he said he's not getting a join button.
Well, I think that this is one of the reasons that I said that it's good that Google is not bidding deal with weapon systems. Can you see somebody on a jet pilot and he's got the beep and he's pushing the fire button and sometimes the missile lets and sometimes the missile doesn't? There, fire. Not good.
Yeah, that's the way I feel with some transmissions.
Oh.
where you ask it to downshift and
I'm biting my tongue. I'm biting my tongue. I've driven other makes too.
So Jim, hopefully you'll be able to find your way in. I'm sorry you're having difficulty. I'll keep sending an invite now and then, and hopefully it will find its way to you, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. My first car was a 41 Chevrolet with a synchro mash gone on second gear, so I learned to double clutch at 14. And once I learned to double clutch, I could get it in low just as easily as in second. So I drove my 3 on the tree like a motorcycle. Just whatever gear I felt like was comfortable in at any given time.
Now, Jim, you still keep a motorcycle?
Yeah.
And tell me again what type of motorcycle it is?
It's a Suzuki Bandit 1200S. It's not a new one. It's a 99 model. I don't have a lot of miles on it. Since my wife doesn't ride on the back anymore, I don't put a lot of miles on it. And
she did back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
How fun.
Yeah, when we lived in L.A. the first year we had it, we went to the Grand Canyon on it, 500-mile trip, one each way. And it was kind of funny because we saw a lot of motorcycles on the road, but none of them were going more than 150 miles.
Which is a long trip on a motorcycle, right?
No, it's 3/4 of a tank, if you call that a long trip.
Right.
Well,
I mean, I know people drive them long distances, but a lot of people would fatigue rapidly after, after a couple or 3 hours on a motorcycle.
well, and in 72, I had a 71 Honda single cam 750, and I put a windjammer fairing on it and got a wetsuit from a sporting goods store, some Vietnam combat boots, and a pair of work gloves. And I got on it and rode from Austin. And by sundown, I was visiting my sister near Oklahoma City and her kids and her husband. And then I rode on north into Oklahoma, through into Kansas, stopped in Dodge City and saw it was a cardboard tourist trap. Uh, Went on and stayed the night, and not the second night, I don't really recall, in Estes Park, where I had a friend had relatives, and I stayed and visited there for overnight. And then I rode on over into Salt Lake, and I was a tourist there for a while. Then drove over and visited a friend in San Francisco, and stayed a couple of days and got really bored. Then I drove north into Seattle, and then took a day trip to Vancouver and saw the Space Needle. Came back and spent the night again in Seattle. Then I drove east into Wyoming, and then down through the Tetons in Yellowstone. There was a road washed out in the Tetons that the pavement was gone clear to about 4 feet from the cliff. I could get through, but it was clear that any car that came winding around the curve that didn't stop would, you've seen those signs, be prepared for falling rock?
Right.
Well, be prepared for death would be appropriate for that one. I looked and looked and looked for some loose rocks to lay a line on the road or do something to warn. There was nothing, 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 nothing. So I just went on and hoped for the best and forgot it. I spent the last night in Rawlins, Wyoming, and decided that I needed that. I was on schedule, but I wanted an extra day in Austin to run errands. So I rode 1,200 miles back home into Austin on the last 24 hours of riding. About dusk, I stopped in at a highway department tourist rest and advice stop near Amarillo, and I did not know the roads back into Texas. I had a triptych from the AAA, but one thing I told them, I says, I do not like potholes on a motorcycle. I do not like bad weather. I like a gas station every 100 miles. They only got about 150 miles to a tank on those single cam 750s, and so I said, can you give me a route home? And so they made some minor adjustments to the triptych and said, do this, and gave me 2 cups of coffee and sent me on my way. And I arrived in Austin about 10 minutes from when they said I would. And that's just like they said, a gas station every 100 miles, regular as clockwork. And I'll never forget that Texas Highway Department tourist stop.
So when you ride in the winter, you have an insulated suit of some sort?
No, I have a fairing, gloves, a wetsuit or some other full body suit, and a full coverage helmet. And also, I don't ride regularly in the winter. I do that in an emergency or when it's absolutely necessary. But I don't. I usually ride it as a recreational vehicle. I don't ride it as a regular vehicle in the wintertime. I think that they're safest when you ride them when you want to, not when you have to.
Yes. Yes.
But what I'm getting at is, yes, 150 miles is not much of a trip on a motorcycle, or at least it is. It wasn't to me. Now maybe it's just me. You know, I was born before Hitler invaded Austria. You know, so maybe it's just me. About 2 weeks.
Well, you know, and I know people talk about driving thousands of miles on a motorcycle, but you know, to your point, I think many people don't drive thousands of miles on their motorcycle.
Oh, you're right. I've seen, you know, we see stuff on CaddyInfo where people talk about, well, they take those Brembo brakes off of the CTS because they find some neat-looking wheels and they won't fit over the Brembo, so they put the stock CTS brakes on them, and they stop just fine. People throw out what can be done for what they want, which is not the full capability of the vehicle. So
Jim,
it happens all the time.
I'm going to have to wrap up. Somebody's calling me on my other lines. Thanks for being on tonight, and it was good to see you.
Okay.
I gotta hit stop